Good morning, Anchor community. Pastor Bryan here, and I am closing out this 2-week series simply called Reflection and Anticipation. Last week, our pastor of spiritual formation, Susan Baptista, talked about reflection and how looking back can be an aid to our formation and our discipleship in the way of Jesus. And today, I'm going to be talking about what it looks like to cultivate holy anticipation. To do this, we're going to be looking at Joshua chapter 1. So it's going to be up on the screen. If you have a Bible, you can look at it there. It's going to be up on the screen, however you best engage with the text. But let's dive into it. It begins in verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites. I'll give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the deserts to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you, and I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. And be careful to obey all of the law my servant Moses gave to you. And do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it, and that you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So if you've looked at this passage before, if you were with us last week, Joshua is about to lead the Israelites into the promised land. They've been wandering through the desert for decades, and finally they can see it. They can picture it. The promised land is right there. They're anticipating it. When was the last time you anticipated something? Not in an anxious, nervous way, but in like an excited way. Some of you who have been around Anchor for a while know my story with my wife, Candace, how I proposed to her going to South Africa where she was living at the time, proposed to her, and she said no. And my hopes were, for a small period of time, dashed. But always the optimist. I got back on my feet and eventually stayed 7 months later. I proposed to her again and she said yes. Can you imagine the anticipation that I was not only having for the day when she would say yes, but then also for the wedding day? Can you remember that day for yourself? Those of us who are married, you're looking forward to that day, the anticipation for that day. All right, it's going to be a stretch, but what if you had like wedding day anticipation for 2021? I know it's a stretch. Maybe we could have Christmas package opening day or maybe Amazon Prime expectation or anticipation for 2021. But like, what if we had a measure of excited anticipation for 2021? I mean, I know, 2020 has done a good job of trying to make cynics of us all. I just read this commentary or this article in the Boston Globe by Dave Barry. He writes a reflection on the previous year every year. His one on 2020 was hilarious and a little heartbreaking. And there is this reality that 2020, as we know, we're so well aware of, has tried to make cynics of us all. But what if he didn't let it? What if what if we as an Anchor community cultivated holy anticipation? I think that word holy is important there. Because I think for many of us, we cultivate this level of anticipation that is actually like placing our hope that we should place with God on the future. So we think that like, oh, the future will solve all the problems, or the future will answer all of my questions or give me all of my needs. And we place this level of hope that really only belongs on God's shoulders on some ambiguous future. And to our detriment, we get frustrated because it never satisfies. But I also think that like looking towards the future, with kind of like this resigned who cares, is also not reflective of the way of Jesus. I remember talking to a follower of Jesus about like wanting to see God work in a powerful way. And he said, well, what makes you think God has promised that? And I was like, come on, dude. I mean, like, maybe you can make a theological argument for why we shouldn't expect great things from God in the future, but why would you? I mean, he is God after all. And so holy anticipation is this. We're not placing the hope that we should place on God, on the future, but we are believing that the God who controls all and is sovereign and good will meet us in the future. And so there will be good things for us in the future. That's what holy anticipation is. And I think as we look at Joshua chapter 1, we can learn some things about what it looks like to cultivate holy anticipation. One of the refrains in that passage we just read is this sense of like, I will never leave you or forsake you. I mean, it's said once there in that passage, but it's like communicated in a variety of ways multiple times. I'll never leave you or forsake you. Now, for the Bible scholar, for the person that's like interested in the Bible, it's important for us, okay, does this apply to me? Or is this something that is just for Joshua? Is this something that God was uniquely communicating to this one person in this one moment of time? Or does it have this ability to transcend that moment of time to apply to all generations of God's people? And the cool thing is that phrase, I will never leave you nor forsake you, is actually a promise that applies to all the people of God throughout all time. In fact, when you look at it, that phrase is spoken by God in the book of Deuteronomy before Joshua took over leadership of Israel. And it's also spoken of in Hebrews chapter 13. So the author of Hebrews speaks about it and writes to this Christian community that's trying to wrestle through what it looks like to follow Jesus in their particular time. So it's communicated elsewhere in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, which means it's something for us to believe about how God wants to relate to us. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Now, the second question, and maybe more of the cynic's question, is what difference does it make to my life? So the first question is like, does it apply to me? And yes. Second question is, what difference does it make to my life? Like, how will it affect me cultivating holy anticipation, looking towards this future? I remember a conversation I had with a mentor and a friend. The friend was not a follower of Jesus, did not believe in God. And this mentor was a person that was helping me understand what it looked like to follow God. And I remember we were talking about a verse like this. It wasn't this exact verse, but it was a verse like this. And I remember this friend said, well, that's a cute psychological trick for you Jesus followers. You can kind of like say, kind of get some little quick inspiration, and think that God's like with you. It's a cute psychological trick. And I remember kind of feeling like, wait, is that kind of thrown off a little bit, back on my heels? Like, wait, is that all we're doing? Is this with thinking that God will not leave us or forsake us? Is it just kind of a psychological mind game to give us a little bit of like inspiration to go forward into a challenging situation? And the mentor that was also a part of this conversation said something that like I still keep with me today. He goes, it would be a psychological trick if it wasn't real, if it wasn't true. If God did not exist, then yes, it would just be a psychological trick. But if God does exist, the fact that he says to us, he will never leave us or forsake us, is the most profound reality of all of life. I think for some of us, we wonder, well, then how come challenge continues to happen? And so that's not part of what God is promising us. He's not promising us to be immune from challenge. He's promising us that he will never leave us or forsake us. And it's like interesting when you look at like how the author of Hebrews uses this particular verse, like he like uses it in a particular way that communicates like the real life power that it brings to everyday life. For instance, in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, he says, marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? Did you catch that? The author of Hebrews is writing to this Christian community that is under pressure. They have left being a part of the Jewish tradition to become followers of Jesus, the fulfillment of the Old Testament embodied in the person of Jesus. They're followers of Jesus. But in the Roman world, it was not a recognized religion, so it often faced persecution and ostracization. So these Hebrew Christians are in this tough place, oftentimes forgotten or maligned by their family and not understood or rejected by culture. And here, the author of Hebrews says, the source to overcome not just the persecution and pressures you feel in your everyday life, but the temptations you feel internally around finances and sexuality. The power to overcome those temptations is to recognize that God is near. You don't have to go down the path of toxic escape, fleeing from the challenges of life through a quick hit, through an escape, because you can know in that moment and draw power in your everyday practical life from the fact that God is with you and he's not going to leave you. I love it. He says, so we can say with confidence, the Lord's my helper. We can say that with confidence. We don't say it kind of with mild, timid, kind of, I don't know, maybe God will come through. No, we say it with confidence because God promised that he won't leave us or forsake us. So we say with confidence that God's my helper. We can overcome temptation. We don't have to escape from the pressures of the world with a quick hit, whether financial or whatever. We can know and believe that God won't leave us or forsake us. Have you ever had a moment, followers of Jesus, have you ever had a moment where you're reading scripture and you just feel, you know God is near? You feel invincible. You know, the things that would normally make you feel insecure, like somebody saying something, you know, like whether it could be about how you look or anything else that might be a trigger for you, but you know in that moment, I feel invincible because I know God is near. Like for us to cultivate holy anticipation, we need to become mindful of the God that is near. It's not a little neat psychological trick. It's not just Instagram inspiration. It's something that is a spiritual reality. And here's the thing is, just like when I'm going outside in the cold, I can choose to put on a coat, which will bring warmth to me, or I can choose to go out with my t-shirt on, freezing, you know, like I can have a choice. And so like the same reality is true for us daily. When we go out into the coldness of life, we can put on God. We can draw close to God and draw strength from God and draw warmth from God. Or we can say, you know what, I'm just going to do it on my own. But when we draw close to God, we realize he won't leave us or forsake us. He won't make us immune from challenge, but he will not leave us in the challenge. Like when you know that going into this year, there's like nothing can really take you down. The second thing we learn from this passage of scripture that will help us cultivate holy anticipation is this phrase, be strong and courageous. I mentioned that the previous phrase, I'll never leave you, forsake you, like is repeated multiple times in a variety of ways. Like God says, I will be with you, just like I was with Moses, you know, I'm with you. And it's kind of this repeated refrain of like, hey, I'm not going anywhere, Joshua, I'm not going anywhere. But then there's this equal repeated phrase of be strong and courageous over and over again. And it's important to hold these two things together. That the God who says, I'm not going to leave you or forsake you, also says, be strong and courageous. The God that repeats himself on saying, I'm not going to leave you, also repeats himself on saying, be strong and courageous. See, the mark of knowing that God won't leave you or forsake you, it shows up in the mark of your courage. If you know God isn't going to leave you or forsake you, you steadily, progressively live a more and more courageous life. This is true just like when we think about child psychology and family psychology. A psychologist will tell you a child that grows up in an environment where there is attached parents, healthy attached parents to the child, that child will grow up to become courageous. Because they know, they have an understanding of the world that they're in some fundamental way safe. You see, healthy strength emerges from a healthy environment. The type of strength and courage that shows up in like advocating for the weak, creating, like whether it's art or a business, like that type of strength and courage shows it manifests, it comes out of healthy environments, not just family of origin. Sometimes the family of origin is actually not that healthy, and we need like a church family to reparent and to refamily us so that we can live lives of courage and strength. And sometimes that's a bit of the journey, the unlearning and the relearning. But healthy strength emerges from a healthy environment. And similarly, toxic strength, it emerges from a toxic environment. The attacking dominant strength, that toxic type of strength, it shows up in toxic environments and emerges from them. So it's important to note that God is actually creating for Joshua this incredibly healthy environment. He's saying, I'm not going to leave you. I'm totally with you. I'm not going anywhere, Joshua. Be strong and courageous. Note that it's a command. It's not like maybe you could be strong and courageous today. It's like no, Joshua, I'm not leaving you. You be strong and courageous. As we face 2021, we can become strong and courageous because God is the God that is with us. He is the God that won't leave us or forsake us. And so when we do that, when we believe that, we can be that type of strong, that type of courageous. It's important to note that there's this because after that passage. Be strong and courageous because I think in our Western world, we've atomized and this idea of strength and courage to be something that's an independent person by themselves. But the Hebrew world actually has more of a collective mindset. And so when you see be strong and courageous, this is because you will lead people across the Jordan River into the promised land. I recently, some of you guys know this, I sold my van because we wanted to pay off all of our credit card debt. We wanted to get rid of it. So I sold this precious thing that I love, not as much as my kids and my family, but I love it. I love my van. I sold it, and I took pay off this debt. And it wasn't super hard. It was something we wanted to do. And we were thankful to be able to do it. And then I remember somebody texted me and they said, thanks for your courage to sell that thing to get rid of some debt. I'm doing the same thing with an extra vehicle we have now because I saw you do it. You see, that's not to puff myself up. So if you've been around the Anchor community for a while, you know that I am totally comfortable sharing illustrations that I'm kind of the butt of the illustration. I'm totally comfortable with that. I share that because it's like when you're strong and courageous, you create a possibility that a person hadn't seen before. When you live a strong and courageous life, somebody sees strength and courage and like, oh, that's possible. Oh, I didn't quite realize that it was possible. Or they say, oh, I had a hunch that it was possible, but now I see that it can be possible. Oh, God didn't leave that person or forsake that person when they stepped out in strength and courage. That means that when I step out in strength and courage, God won't leave me or forsake me. The world might say that what I tried was a failure, but God is with me and I will learn from it. We begin to show the world a possibility that they had not seen before. And that's what I love, that Joshua passage. God doesn't say be strong and courageous, so that you can actualize yourself. Be strong and courageous because people are looking at you. People are following you. People are wondering, what does it look like to cross the Jordan, to step into the promised land? All we've known is wilderness. 2021, people are going to be looking at you. If you practice strength and courage, you're creating a possibility where God actually can be trusted in the midst of a challenging moment. And people will say, people will look to you. What does it mean for you to take God at his word that he's not going to leave you or forsake you? What does it mean for you to practice, to be strong, to be courageous in this moment? What does that look like? The third thing we can just practice, that we can integrate, that we can learn from Joshua, to help us cultivate holy anticipation is what I'm calling just kind of this stay close to God practices. Stay close to God practices. God says, I'm not going to leave you, forsake you. But then there's also this invitation for us to not leave him. You see, right there at the beginning, or actually at the beginning of verse 7, he says, be strong and courageous, be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. It says, do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night. So what we see is God saying, hey, stay close to me. And I love that it brings in together all the elements that we would call in our current moment like doing and being. He says, obey me. Keep my law. Don't turn to the left or to the right, but obey me. Let your practices and your active life be filled with obvious and clear devotion to me. And how you use your words, and how you spend your energy, what your thought life looks like, how you spend your money. Let that be filled with this obvious devotion. You could point to it and say, wow, that person's a follower of God. But then also there's this being sense where it's like meditate. Meditate. That Hebrew word for meditate is to growl, like a lion over his prey or her prey, growling, like wanting to eat and to consume it. And God is saying, hey, with that type of energy, like just hunger for my word, meditate on it day and night. The picture that we're getting here is that don't turn to the left or to the right, obey me, meditate on my word day and night. And what God is wanting us through this holistic approach, this holistic idea, vision of staying close with Jesus, staying close with God. Day and night, right and left, active life, contemplative life, all of ourselves being close with God. For us, this might look like bringing on a practice in our everyday life that facilitates, that cultivates a closer connection with God in our everyday life. And this helps us cultivate holy anticipation, because the closer we stay with Jesus, the more we are aware of what he might be doing in the present moment. Practices, like spiritual practices and disciplines, I've had, sometimes it's easy to kind of have them feel burdensome. In fact, I've had this experience with New Year's resolutions. Some of you guys are probably, thinking about starting a New Year's resolution. I've had this kind of like phobic interaction with New Year's resolutions for years. And I started to realize this, is that my concern around New Year's resolutions was thinking that they're futile because no one ever keeps them. And then I started to realize that the problem is not with the New Year's resolutions. It's with me. It's with me. And this is like a universal problem. In fact, the app Strava, which maps out running and cycling, and mountain climbing, and various sports, it notes a 3-week height and then all this like a crazy drop after 3 weeks, 3 weeks after January 1, it's like all of a sudden the Strava app, everybody's using it, but then all of a sudden it just drops. And they mapped this out with Foursquare, which is the app that you check in at various restaurants. And all of a sudden the Foursquare app shows that more fast food starts jumping up right around 3 weeks. It's this crazy study. We have this phobic or awkward like engagement with New Year's resolutions. And what happens is they end up facilitating kind of like, when we know we're going to fail, we just either stop them or we feel like just what's the point, or we feel like a failure ourselves. And I think the same thing is true with spiritual disciplines and spiritual practices. They can feel like a burdensome thing in an already busy life. Here's what I believe. Discipline disconnected from vision will get discarded. I'll say that again. Discipline disconnected from vision will get discarded. Think about this. If you're cutting wood, you got a wood fireplace. You're cutting wood. You bring the axe out. You have the wood. The point is not the axe. The point is not the wood. The point is the warm house and the fire. But a lot of times with our disciplines, we make it about the actual discipline, or we make it about, something. The point is not the discipline itself. The point is that we keep close company with Jesus. The point is that we become the person that Jesus is inviting us to become in 2021, that we become a person that is more patient and is long-suffering, is marked by courage and advances the kingdom and takes ground, is creative, is wise financially. The point is that we become a certain type of person and we honor God and keep close company with God in that. But discipline disconnected from vision always gets discarded. So if we think, I'm going to do lots of disciplines, I'm going to read scripture more, I'm going to read through the whole Bible, I'm going to do it in a month, I'm going to get it done. If you make it about the doing, then what happens is it gets disconnected from the vision. The vision is not that you would do the thing. The vision is that you would become a person that is close to Jesus and marked by transformation, marked by the Spirit's power, marked by the character of Christ. I want to invite you guys, Anchor community, to starting today, January 3rd, or starting on Monday, January 4th. Let's do 21 days of fasting and prayer. And the point is not the fasting and prayer, right? The point is that, through the saying no to something and through carving out times of prayer, we might become people that are marked by strength and courage, by a closer proximity to Jesus, by wholeness. Think about all the things that just around the Anchor community, we're looking towards what the future, what gatherings look like. We're going to be launching Anchor groups again. We're launching a church on January 10th. We're starting to grow growth groups again. These smaller groups of 3 and 5 where intimacy and discipleship can really happen on a deep level. There's so much just as an Anchor community that we can be praying for and seeking God for through fasting and prayer. And then there's stuff in your personal life as you look towards 2021 where you know those things. You want to be giving them to God. And when we do a discipline that's connected to a vision of getting closer to God and becoming a more whole, healed person, we take those steps towards the actual thing we really desire. Become that person that is more radiant, patient, joyful, confident, ground-taking, kingdom advancing. And we can do this, not because of our sheer willpower, because we grew up in a really great home. We can do this because God won't leave us or forsake us. And he calls us to a corresponding level of strength and courage. And he calls us to keep company with him in the real life, everyday, practical, disciplined way of living. We can do this ultimately, though, because we can ultimately become the type of person that God is inviting us to because God became a person himself. Born in a manger, died on a cross so that we might have the power as he took on the full weight of our humanity and the full weight of our brokenness, so that we might have the power to become just like him. You're invited to that. You're invited to becoming more like Jesus in 2021. This might not be the year where you become a supermodel or a social media influencer. It might be the year, and hey, that would be great. But it might not be the year. But it can be the year where people can look at you and say, that person is marked by the character of Jesus and the power of the Spirit. This can be the year. Let's cultivate holy anticipation as we become more like him as a community, as individuals, as a family. That's the invitation.